The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. The Radical. This is Fundamental Principles of Freedom.
Always something. Always something. Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a good evening on this, Tuesday. All right. So, thanks for joining me. I'm supposed to have a show today with Amy, but unfortunately, Amy was unavailable today, so we'll do a quick show without her. I'm used to, the ones with Amy, I'm used to kind of being a little bit more laid back because she prepares everything, she gets all the notes, she gets everything ready, and then I just have to show up and comment on stuff that she has already prepared. So the fact that she's not here, we miss you, Amy, and it means that I had to do some prep for the show. So what I decided to do was basically just open up the news, open up the paper, and see what kind of stories we came up and maybe just comment on some stuff that's in the news, just random stuff that's in the news. I'm sure we'll come up with a theme across it all. I'm not sure what the theme will be. We'll have to see. But we'll just take a bunch of different stories and see where they take us. Hopefully, we won't get too political, and those of you who are big Trump fans don't get too upset. And I know I trigger you and I commit all these microaggressions against Trump fans, but we'll see where this takes us. So I'm going to start actually with something where we can actually something positive I have to say about the Trump administration. Not too significant, not too big, but still a positive, and that is that today the Trump administration announced that they were exiting the Paris Accord. If you remember, the Paris Accord is an international accord that basically dictates reductions. Or it doesn't really dictate. We'll get to that in a minute. But it kind of encourages reductions in CO2 emissions, with the idea that the world is heating up and ice is melting everywhere, except I guess in my freezer, and just catastrophic disaster is about to hit us all, and the only way around this is for us to reduce our carbon emissions. Now, of course, the funny thing about it is they don't even take themselves seriously, because the Paris Accord is a toothless, hollow, I'm quoting from Commentary Magazine. They said the document is a toothless, hollow expression of national aspirations that would have almost no effect on global greenhouse gas emissions overall, even by the standards of the UN or by the standards of anybody. It's just a completely empty document. So, it's great that the United States leaves. I think it's important as a statement that not everybody agrees with this nonsense and this approach to CO2 and to supposed climate change. That not everybody agrees to the approach to it. But the fact is, the Paris Accord was meaningless. Nobody's actually achieving their stated goals, except the United States, and we'll get to that in a minute. So European Union is way short of its promises. Canada, at the rate they're going right now, will achieve its targets, even with a socialist government, will achieve its targets in roughly 2 centuries. 2 centuries. That's 200 years, right? The only signatories to the Paris Accord that are actually meeting their objectives as stated are Morocco and Gambia. Not exactly countries that are going to have any impact whatsoever on CO2 emissions. Indeed, one of the kind of amusing things about the Paris Accords is that China was defined as a developing nation, which it is. It's not a developed nation. It's still a very poor nation in terms of the standard of living of its individual citizens. And as a consequence, they didn't set targets for China. So China was exempt from any kind of emissions targets. And, so it's promised to stop curbing emissions in 2030, by which time, it will have emitted dramatically more than it is now. And of course, India, another developing country, is also not subject to any restrictions. And it will, it will double its carbon emissions from 2012 to 2030. So it's, it's an irrelevant document. The whole Paris Accord is one big joke. And indeed, the reason Trump can just withdraw us from the Accord is that Obama, who signed on to the Paris Accord, never actually got Congress to vote on it. So if Congress had voted on it and made it a treaty, then only Congress could approve getting out of it. But because Congress never voted on it, it's been in limbo. It's never really become a treaty, by which the U.S. has to abide. Trump can just withdraw us easily. Of course, the next president can just put us back in easily. That's the problem of doing stuff without actual legislation. But the funny thing is that the United States is actually on target to reduce greenhouse emissions by between 26 and 28% from their 2005 level by 2025. But they're on target not because of any grand federal policy. They're on target for a number of different things. One is state restrictions at the state level, states like California and other states that have restricted carbon emissions. But most of the reason for the fact that we're emitting less, Europe is increasing carbon emissions. In spite of all their investment, in spite of all their focus on alternative energies, they are not decreasing their emissions, and they're not anywhere close to the targets they set. But the United States is, primarily because of more efficient cars, more efficient power generation, and more efficient, extraction industries, and basically the transition to natural gas, which is still a carbon, but far more efficient than oil or coal. And coal is disappearing. In spite of Trump promising to save the coal industry is dead, mostly because coal is just too expensive relative to natural gas and relative to the availability of natural gas. So the United States is actually going to meet its standards, whether we are in the Paris Accord or not. So it's good that we're leaving, good signal, good message, good action. In real life, in terms of actual consequences, not very significant, because it's not going to change our behavior. I mean, the Trump administration has been pretty good on energy policy. So Perry, Secretary of the Energy, although he's resigning now, was pretty good at allowing more drilling, at actually eliminating some of the penalties for coal and some of the penalties for carbon, and some of the rolling back some of the Obama attempts to penalize the energy industry. So Perry's been pretty good. It's sad that we're not seeing a boom in nuclear energy production. It's sad that we're not seeing even a greater expansion in oil drilling around the United States. But better than the alternatives in terms of oil production, in terms of energy production, this administration has been. All right, so good riddance to Paris. Now, Capitalist Nick asks, when are you getting Alex Epstein back on the show? Sometime, we'll coordinate schedules. I haven't had many people being interviewed on the show. Encore was the first in a long time. My plan is to resurrect the interview format, and I'm sure Alex will be one of the people. There's still a lot backlist of people who I haven't interviewed yet, which I would like to which I would like to interview. And then, what do I think of the recent debate with Robert Kennedy? I haven't seen it. I'm sure he did great. I haven't seen it. I'm looking forward to seeing it. You know, maybe I'll comment once I actually see it. But you know, Alex is good at what he does, so I'm sure it was good. All right, one other comment on relevant to the whole global, you know, climate change, warming, whatever they want to call it these days, or you know, the catastrophe, the global extinction of mankind because of climate change. Today, we had I guess, 11,000 experts. I mean, I'm reading from Bloomberg, but I saw this in other news feeds, so this is coming out of somewhere. I don't know if this is legit or illegit, but this is a press release that's circulating everywhere. More than 11,000 experts. 11,000. I wonder what qualifies them as experts. Have signed an emergency declaration warning that energy, food, and reproduction must change immediately. Immediately. Or we're all going to die. Why? Because of climate change. And they say 40 years ago, scientists from 50 nations converged on Geneva to discuss what was then called the CO2 climate problem. At the time, with reliance on fossil fuels having helped trigger the 1979 oil crisis, they predicted global warming would eventually become a major environmental challenge. Indeed, they made some bold, specific predictions back then, none of which have actually come true. But these 11,000 scientists are now saying, 40 years have gone by and we've done nothing. And they say the Paris Accord is meaningless. It's stupid. It's irrelevant. I mean, at best, the Paris Accord, if everybody follows the guideline to the letter, would reduce the warming by 0.2 degrees centigrade, insignificant, meaningless. So we need drastic change. We need, obviously, to change energy. We need a Green New Deal. We need to get rid of fossil fuels. We need a shift to alternative energy. And we need to do it quickly, and we need to do it now, immediately. And, of course, we need to change our food supply. Way too many cows farting methane out there. Way too much methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas, more supposedly responsible for climate change than CO2 emissions. So we need to stop the cows from farting. The only way to stop the cows from farting is basically to kill them. So we need to stop eating beef, which means killing millions of cows. I don't know if this applies to pork and chicken and others, but basically, we should become vegetarians. But even vegetarians, then we have to chop down forests in order to grow more vegetables so we can all eat vegetables. I don't know if that's going to work. But anyway, let's not bother with the details when there's a crisis and we're all going to die if we don't do it. So, hysteria. And of course, most importantly, we have to get the global population under control. Now, under control or stabilized, they say, is code word for population control. It's code word for sterilizations, which is what Paul Ehrlich called for in the late 1960s in his book, The Population Bomb. It means one-child-like policies, like China had. It means coercion on a massive global scale to reduce the number of, God forbid, people. We don't want more people. People are bad. People consume meat, and meat causes the earth to warm. Of course, they say we need to do this carefully, and we need to make sure we do it justly and with social, in a way that ensures social integrity, whatever the hell any of that means. It means we need to use coercion and force, but gently. And given that we have to maintain social justice, maybe we should sterilize the rich first. Now, that's me, that's not them. But maybe we should sterilize rich people first because we don't want to penalize poor people. They're suffering enough. I mean, look, I've said many times that I don't get into the whole issue of the science of climate change. It would take too much energy for me. I'll leave that to Alex Epstein and others. And even Alex doesn't completely just say, no, it's all bogus. But what is clearly bogus is the hysteria. What is clearly bogus is the solutions, are the solutions. If the climate is changing, let's come up with technologies that sustain human life given the changing climate. Let's say it's true that global temperatures are rising. Let's even say it's true that global temperatures are rising significantly. That means if we had a free market, then insurance policies at places that are going to flood would be rising dramatically right now, incentivizing people to move away from those areas to safer places. That's a great market mechanism to shift populations away from places that might flood. Or you could imagine insurance companies teaming up with homeowners associations, teaming up with towns and cities in areas that were going to flood, where people were willing to pay for remedial mechanisms like dikes, like flood canals, like all kind of things like that would reduce the impact of rising sea levels, like Amsterdam, which has had dikes for hundreds of years, I think, is below sea level. And last time I was in Amsterdam, it was a pretty cool city. Didn't flood, didn't have people running away. So today we have technology far exceeds the technology that existed back then. Build dikes. Maybe as it gets warmer, some people will have to buy electricity. I mean, not buy electricity, buy air conditioning. And maybe we should developers should start thinking about that. Right? Maybe we should deregulate energy markets, make it a true free fall, and thus encourage investment in nuclear, and maybe encourage philanthropists like Bill Gates, who is doing this indeed, to invest in nuclear, because maybe it's not economical to invest in nuclear if it's not a philanthropic venture, but if it's true that the world is about to end, then maybe nuclear energy makes sense and philanthropic people will start investing in it. How about some of that philanthropy money, or just science money, with corporations and other, maybe insurance companies who don't want to see insured properties flood, invest in technologies that suck CO2 out of the air. There's one technology, I can't remember the university that developed it, that actually sucks the methane out of the air, and it turns methane, which is a really bad greenhouse gas, well, assuming the models are correct, into CO2, which is actually not a really bad. So I think methane is 5 times more damaging than CO2 or something like that. Anyway, you would be able to reduce the greenhouse effect by just turning methane into CO2, and there are machines that can do this. So why not do it? So let's think about technological solutions that don't involve the end of economic growth, the end of industrialization, the end of technological progress, and the end of human life for probably hundreds of millions, if not billions of people, which is what would be involved if we stopped using fossil fuels. So put aside the science. Let's, if there's a real problem, markets will solve it. We will solve it. Individuals will solve it. Technology will solve it. But the very fact that these kind of solutions are rejected by the proponents of climate change, of the hysteria around climate change, suggests to me that they're not serious, that this is all just one big way of, motivated by the ideologues of hatred of mankind. It would be great to shrink the number of people on Earth, and it would be great to finally get rid of economic progress, economic growth, industrialization, and technology. That's the real goal of the intellectuals behind this whole movement. They want us to go back to the caves. They really, really, really do want us. And they don't want anything for themselves. They just want to, in glee, watch us all die as they wither away and die as well. But they don't care because their lives are meaningless. All right, here's a super chat question. Thoughts on the growing antipathy among young people for the baby boomer generation? I admit I've harbored similar sentiments. I mean, I don't like any generation. I mean, the last generation I liked was the generations that were born, and unfortunately many of whom died in the First World War. But like, what generation do you like? Oh, what do you call the generation that fought in World War II? The greatest generation? No, it wasn't the greatest generation. What was so great about it? Yes, they fought in World War II. Good for them. They also gave us Social Security. They gave us FDR. They gave us Johnson. They gave us the Great Society, the war on poverty. They gave us an ever-growing United States. They gave us a war in Vietnam. What's so great about the greatest generation? They gave us the modern United States, which is far, far, far removed from the true greatest generation, which was the founding generation, by far the greatest generation in American history. And then all the generations in the 19th century and early 20th century that built this country, that created this country, that created the amazing industrial powerhouse, economic powerhouse that is the United States of America. The generation of J.P. Morgan, the generation of J.D. Rockefeller, those are the generations that moved west, the generations of pioneers that established this country, that grew this country, that bootstrapped themselves and the country. And by the way, that was a generation. That generation was to a large extent generations of immigrants that came here with nothing, no education, no ability, no knowledge, and made something of themselves, and assimilated and adopted the values of this nation, and then their kids and grandkids blew it and screwed it all up. And that's primarily the greatest generation. And then it comes to the baby boomers, who gave us the summer of love in the 60s. And I'm at the tail end of the baby boomers. The tail end of the baby boomers. Who gave us the new left, gave us nihilism as an established project of the left. Who gave us the rise of evangelicals and the rise of Christianity as a political force in America. Really for the first time since probably certain periods in the 19th century, or maybe early 20th century, where there were these revivalist movements of religion. The baby boomers, who, rejected the founding principles, who cemented the statism that had been established by generations before them. Right? So, no, I don't like any of these generations. And of course, I don't think the younger generation is any better. In some respects, they're worse, because they've gone through a more modern educational system, an educational system that's been established by whom? By the baby boomers, who are the teachers, the educators, the professors, the intelligentsia. My generation, my age and older, they have left us, they have left you, those of you who are young, a worse world than they inherited. So I'm not impressed with any generation since World War I. Ayn Rand was born in 1905. As she said, she was lucky enough to be born in time to glimpse the greatness of the 19th century, the greatness of the sense of life, the attitude, the respect for life, the respect for the individual, the respect for progress that the 19th century had, the respect for beauty. Think about 19th century art, music, drama, novels. The respect for beauty that the 19th century had. Well, that died. That died with World War I. Physically died with World War I. And we have never really recovered it. And we're on the path now to make it much, much worse. All right, wow, we're getting a ton of Super Chat questions. Keep them coming. I want to cover at least one more point, and there's one question here related to it. Let's see. Okay. So one more topic I want to talk about, as you know, probably know, Elizabeth Warren has come out with her explanation for how she's going to fund the Medicare for all. And it's an astounding plan, astounding in its just blatant lie, so much so, that Elizabeth Warren has come under massive attack from the New York Times, from the Washington Post, from a number of left-wing sources that are basically saying, this is nuts. This is truly nuts. At least Sanders is honest enough to say Medicare for all is going to cost a fortune. Taxes are going to have to go up. We're rich in a country, that's fine, so taxes will go up. What Elizabeth Warren is doing is fudging the numbers and raising taxes and lowering payments to doctors and hospitals by more than what Medicare has already lowered them today. So destroying what a couple of shows ago I talked about, the production side of healthcare. So let's go over a little bit of kind of Elizabeth Warren's numbers. Now, notice that I think Democrats are panicking. They're panicking because she is now the leader. I have come to think, given the left's response, the establishment's response to Elizabeth Warren, that she probably is not going to be the candidate. I don't know who is, but I think there's growing chances that Elizabeth Warren will not be. So I've read a number of stories now about big donors, particularly in Wall Street, saying they will not give the Democratic Party at all, anybody in the Democratic Party, including senators in Senate races, if Elizabeth Warren is at the top of the ticket. So the Democratic Party is in massive panic mode around Elizabeth Warren. I think, again, Wall Street fears her more than they feared Bernie Sanders, and I gave you the reason for that. When I talked about Elizabeth Warren versus Bernie Sanders in the past, she is much more dangerous than Bernie Sanders is. All right, let's do this. Let's do some numbers. Warren's campaign estimates her plan to finance universal health care comes in at the staggering $52 trillion over a decade. Remember, government spends now about $4 trillion. This is $52 trillion over a decade. That's $5 trillion a year. That's doubling government spending, right? Now, she says no because much of that is already being spent on Medicare. So she actually believes that it would only cost an additional $20 trillion. So you'd only be increasing government spending by 50%, from $4 trillion to $6 trillion a year. But everybody, it seems, left and right, thinks that is a massive understatement. The numbers that almost everybody is projecting for Medicare for all is $35 trillion of additional government spending over the next 10 years, which means 3.5, which means almost doubling government spending. And now that is astounding rate. And that would put, by the way, government spending in the United States, federal, state, and local, at a higher level as a percent of GDP than those amazing Scandinavian countries that the left loves to talk about. We would spend more as a percentage of GDP if you take in all government programs across all different levels of government than Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway do, if we actually spent an additional $35 trillion over the next 10 years. Okay. Now, all estimates about spending on health care by government historically have always been lower than the reality. So the $35 trillion is probably much less than what will actually happen or what will actually be demanded. And that's where the rationing, the controls, the price controls, everything else will have to play a role, because there's no way they'll be able to keep it at 35 trillion. But notice, she's already cheating by 15 trillion in order to be able to say no middle class tax increase. Now, how does she finance all this? Well, all kinds of new taxes on all kinds of economic activity, mostly targeted at the wealthy, right? Not at the middle class, so at least that's the attempt she is making, to present it that way. And the main way she's going to penalize the wealthy is, you remember she originally included a tax on anybody that had more than, I think it was 50 million. It was going to be a wealth tax of 3%. Well, she's going to double that. She's going to make it 6%. 6%. And, she fudges the numbers here too, because there's only 15% of dollars will actually be avoided, where everybody agrees that it would be much, much higher than that. But, okay, so she's going to raise it to 6%. And, of course, there's no economic consequences to that, right? We know that because, what were those rich people going to do with that money? They were just going to put it in their mattress. They were just probably going to hoard it. They were just going to, I don't know, dig a hole in the backyard and stick it in there. So, again, people ignore the fact that it's the wealthy that invest their money, and that investment is what creates jobs. That investment is what creates economic activity, that investment. So, yes, you're not taxing the middle class, but who's going to suffer from the 6% wealth tax? Well, the rich. They'll have 6% less money. I don't know how impactful that'll be on their quality of life, their standard of living. But the middle class and the working class, who won't have jobs, whose factories will shut down, whose productivity will decline, whose wages will be flat to down, who cares about them? We didn't increase taxes on them. So we're okay. We didn't increase taxes on them. So we're okay. It's such an ignorant display of economics that you see over and over and over again presented by people. It's just stunning to me that they think they are free lunches. They think that they can just take money from some people and give it to other people, and somehow, miraculously, there are no negative consequences to that. Particularly when they're taking them from the most productive people in the economy, from the investors in the economy, from the people who know stuff in the economy, and using it for consumption, which is what healthcare is. Not for investment in healthcare, not for innovation in healthcare, not for progress in healthcare, not for production in healthcare, but for consumption of healthcare. Now, she also assumes that she's going to give a lot more money to the IRS, and the IRS is going to get tougher with all that tax evasion, and that she's going to raise $2.3 additional trillion over the 10 years doing that. Now, funnily enough, that is 40 times, 40x, 40 times what the Congressional Budget Office estimates the IRS could generate from new enforcement initiatives. She also thinks that by legalizing immigration, the current illegal immigrants in the country, which I don't oppose, but if you legalize them, then that would add another $400 billion in taxes. So she's got all these little things that she is proposing and are going to generate, going to solve all our problems. Whoops, what did I just do? I just opened a bunch of windows that I did not want to open. All right. It's stunning. It truly is. It truly is stunning what she's trying to do. But the good part is that she's getting real pushback, including from places like the Washington Post, including like places from like New York Times, Atlantic Magazine has a story about that this doesn't make any sense. The other thing, of course, that her plan includes, which was always also being ridiculed by many of these publications, it estimates that she's going to pay doctors, particularly specialists, a lot less money. Now, Medicare pays them today. Now, Medicare already pays them a lot less money than private insurance. Imagine what's going to happen to the number of specialists. How many of them are going to go gulp, are going to shrug, when their reimbursements from Medicare for all, so they have no private insurance, they have nobody to increase their fees on, tumble, not just to today's Medicare rates, but lower than that. How many doctors go out of business? How many hospitals go out of business? How many rural hospitals go out of business? And then, of course, she's assuming, this is stunning, that she is going to generate in the plan she presented, this her plan, she's a woman of plans, she is going to reduce drug prices in the United States by 70%, 70. That's how she got the lower cost of Medicare. I mean, imagine what that would do. How many drug companies would go out of business? How many of them would go bankrupt? How much drug innovation would happen? And basically her plan would destroy healthcare for the world, globally. Now, the only thing I'll say about all this, so you guys don't get too depressed, is that she'll never pass this. She's clever, she's smart, but she'll never pass this. Even Democrats in Congress, with the exception of AOC and a handful of others, don't want a plan like this to pass. They know what it would do to them. I mean, remember how people got upset because they couldn't get their own plans under Obamacare. I mean, this would destroy healthcare completely, and people would rebel. So she'll never, even if she wins the election, she can never get it passed. She can never get it by Congress. And given the opposition she's generating right now within the Democratic Party, there's good reason to believe that she can't even win the election. All right, let's go to your Super Chat questions. There are a lot of them, so let's start with one somewhat related. Why does Obamacare not work specifically? Why can you not keep your doctor, and why does it deteriorate quality? Understand basics, but not the specifics. Well, you have to get pretty technical to get into some of this, but let me just give you a simple stuff. So to sell a plan under Obamacare, the plan has to cover certain things. It has to have certain features. It has to be a particular insurance plan with all this coverage of all these things, including pre-existing conditions. As a consequence of that, insurance companies can only offer these kind of plans under the Obamacare framework, right? Now, theoretically, they can offer plans outside of Obamacare framework, but nobody's going to buy them because the Obamacare framework both subsidizes the plans, has subsidies for people who can't. And if they offered, more rigorous plans that priced you based on your risk outside of Obamacare, then, they couldn't offer the Obamacare plans, because what would happen is all the bad risk would go to Obamacare, the Obamacare plan, the Obamacare exchanges. And all the good risk, the healthy people, would go to the outside plans, and they would be destroyed within Obamacare. So what the insurance companies have done, rationally, is they've shut down their plans outside of Obamacare, with a few exceptions. And they offer all their plans through the exchanges. So they took some of your plans that you had before, and they basically not made them available because they don't want you to pick, they have the choice to pick those plans because they're afraid that only healthy people will pick those plans. So what Obamacare has done is it basically has distorted and perverted the insurance market. It has brought a lot of risk into the insurance market because of pre-existing condition. It's capped prices, or at least the prices you pay or poor people pay because the government is subsidizing it. So there's no real price pressure on this because everything's moving together. All the insurance policies basically look the same. There's very little variability. There's very little innovation. And they have to cover everything, so they have to be expensive because they don't know what you're going to use and what you're not going to use. Everything from acupuncture to pregnancy, even if you don't intend to have a baby, to everything. So those are the kind of things. And of course, part of these standardized health insurance problems, many of them function, restrict which doctors you can go to because they restrict it to the doctors the insurance companies have negotiated the best prices with because the insurance companies now worried about their very existence. So you basically put the insurance companies into a corner where their very survival is at stake. And the insurance policies, therefore, are not optimal. They're not market policies. They're not driven by what a market would determine. They're driven by the regulations that Obamacare has put in place. So that's as close as I can get without doing a little prep work and actually going and look at some of the details. But I think that gives you a pretty good sense of why, or at least direction of why Obamacare is as distortive as it is. Okay, let's see if there's anything else healthcare related. Okay, here's one that's Elizabeth Warren related. You stated Warren is an evil methodological arsonist who wants to tear it all down versus Trump, who is fumbling, incompetent pragmatist. Are you making the case for Trump as lesser of two evils? Well, no, because partially I think that the more Trump fumbles, the more likely it is that somebody like Warren gets elected. So the longer Trump is in office, the more likely it is that we elect Elizabeth Warren or worse to replace him. Again, you got to think of the damage being done as what is the long-term damage? And how do we rebound from that damage? And what are the consequences? Where do the American people go after that damage? Right? So I don't think of Trump as, and I said this from before the election, I said you don't evaluate a candidate and you don't evaluate a president. Here are the good things he's done, here are the bad things he's done. Okay, there are more good things than bad things than he's good, there are more bad things. You don't do that. Or you look at the type of bad things and you look at what those bad things are going to lead the country towards. I think Trump is leading the country towards authoritarianism, more and more authoritarianism. Again, not that he is a dictator, but he is legitimizing authoritarianism. He acts like it, he believes in it, and people like it, even though he can't get away with it. But that is being reinforced. And he's turning both political parties, and this is the real damage, both political parties into authoritarian parties. Now, if Elizabeth Warren were elected, would she do the same thing? I doubt it. Because Elizabeth Warren would actually have opposition from within her party. And Elizabeth Warren would have massive opposition from Republicans. She is Elizabeth Warren does not have the kind of following that Donald Trump has. She does not elicit the kind of response he elicits. Now, I'm not claiming that I would vote for Elizabeth Warren or Donald Trump in an election. I wouldn't vote for either one of them. The horror of the evil that choice embodies is just horrific. But I don't think Elizabeth Warren would get anything done, and she doesn't have that kind of charisma that Trump has, that is shaping the dialogue, shaping the attitude, and shaping the direction of a country. Leadership matters. Whoever is in leadership matters. They impact the sense of life. They impact the direction. They impact the soul of a country. They impact the way we think, the way we feel, the way we engage it with issues. And I think Trump is doing that in ways that other candidates, even though on the issues they are worse than him, they couldn't do that to the country. They couldn't do that to the soul of the country. And I know lots of you are going to make fun of me claiming that Trump is poisoning the soul of America, but I think it's an absolute fact. All right. In many ways, like Obama did, and Obama was a little bit like Trump because he had that leadership quality. He had a massive fan base. He had a certain disrespect for democracy, for the division of powers and separation of powers in the American Constitution. And you remember how Republicans were apoplectic about executive orders that he passed. And of course, today they are celebrating executive orders because it's Trump passing them. Now, no question, Elizabeth Warren would do certain things that a president can do. She would not change Trump's trade policies. She would stick to those. Those would be equally bad. But she would dramatically increase regulations. I've said this. She would increase the power of the Consumer Finance Protection Board because she could do that unilaterally without Congress. She would increase environmental regulations for the anywhere from the FDA to the Energy Department to all kinds of other agencies. She would increase all the stuff that Trump is doing now on the regulatory front. She would reverse and put on steroids because Trump hasn't done that much. So she would existentially do a lot of damage. But she wouldn't. But I think there would be a rebellion against her. Whereas with Trump, and maybe it would be a better rebellion because the rebellion that Trump is eliciting is Elizabeth Warren. And the longer Trump is in office, the more popular the Elizabeth Warren wing of the American, or the more Elizabeth Warren's ideas gain credibility with the American people. Donald Trump makes Elizabeth Warren possible, just like Barack Obama made Donald Trump possible. And I don't know how you break that spiral. But that is the spiral we're on right now. All right, what do we have? Let's see. I'm interested in the banking families during the Italian Renaissance. Any reading recommendations? Completely unrelated. I also read Payback. So do you have any further reading on Milken? On the Italian Renaissance, I think people have asked me on the Italian Renaissance. I do have further reading. So here's what I recommend. I recommend picking up my essay on the history of usury. You can find it in my book, The Moral Case for Finance with Don Watkins. And it's the essay on the history of usury and history of interest. And I think I have the citations for books on particular banking in the Italian Renaissance and in the Renaissance more broadly. Beyond that, all my books are in California. I didn't bring any books with me to Puerto Rico, so I can't look back at my bookcase and say, okay, these are the books I recommend, and I don't have them up here. I don't have them in my head. So we would have to wait until I at least visit California and get back to you on a list of books about the Italian Renaissance. But I do think you should, if you're interested in banking in any sense, you should definitely read my Moral Case for Finance book, where you'll get a lot of references for good stuff. Payback on Michael Milken is a brilliant book. I agree with it 100%. Milken was framed. What was done to him was horrific. I hated what's his name? The former mayor of New York, Giuliani, long before he became the personal attorney of Donald Trump. He is one of the most disgusting political figures in America in the last 40 years. You need to read Payback to gain a full appreciation of the evil that is Rudolph Giuliani and the destructive nature of what he did on Wall Street during the 1980s, and how he went after Michael Milken. I don't really have any further reading on Milken. I mean, there's very little good written about the financial world of the 1980s. I do, and again, I think in the Mall Case for Finance, there is material there that might have references to some stuff. I also recommend, which is on YouTube, it's audio only. I have a whole course, I think it's in 7 lectures, on moral defense of financial markets and institutions, which covers a lot of what happened during the 80s and 90s, covers a lot of Mike Milken, covers a lot of like hostile takeovers. And I think you'd really enjoy that. It has a lot of that material in it. So I'd recommend my moral defense of financial markets and institutions, which is a course of lectures, audio only, available on YouTube and in my podcast, on iTunes or whatever podcasting app you use. You can find it there. All right. Why haven't the intellectuals been able to destroy capitalism thus far? In fact, much of the third world has become more capitalist over the last 3 decades. Well, it's not for lack of trying, but it's because of the American and generally I'd say the West's, the remnants of the Enlightenment in the people's spirit. People don't want to be poor, particularly people who have lived rich. People want the material benefits of capitalism. They don't trust it, they don't like it, but they want the material benefits of it. So what happens is you get these swings. People talk about these swings. Politicians take us all the way left, and then things go really, really bad like they did in the 70s in the United States, where you had inflation and stagflation, you had stagnation, inflation, and unemployment, really, really high unemployment, and a really, really awful crime and everything bad. And then you swung with Reagan. And then we got back to reasonable economic growth. And then we swing back to the left. And then it got maybe out of a little control with Bush and Obama. So we swing to, kind of a right. Trump, I don't think we're swinging to the Reagans. We're swinging a little bit on regulation, on taxes. There's a perception, not a reality, a perception that we're swinging to the right. And then with Elizabeth Warren, we might swing to the left. And then, so there's a swinging. The swinging always moves us generally leftwards towards less capitalism. But it extends the life of capitalism. Capitalism doesn't die all at once. On the flip side, in the third world, what you had was they were so poor. They had tried socialism. They had tried communism, and it was utter failure. And basically when the Berlin Wall fell, or even before that, when Mao Zedong died and Deng Xiaoping went to Japan and saw the kind of progress that existed there, they basically, for purely pragmatic reasons, said, well, we can be rich too. And they have adopted elements of capitalism here and there to the extent that the intellectuals have allowed them. And then they get rich, and then they kind of like being rich, so they don't want to go all the way back. So maybe they go back a little bit because they don't want to go all the way forward. But then that causes economic slowdown, like you see now in China, which might ultimately result in a swing back towards liberalization as people realize, well, wait a minute, we don't want to give up all the goodies. So reality is what keeps capitalism from completely and utterly, and capitalism here, I'm talking about the remnants of capitalism, the little bit of private property, the little bit of freedom that we're allowed to have, from completely disappearing. It's the reality of wealth creation and the fact that people, in spite of their morality, don't want to give it up completely. They're willing to give it up a little bit at a time. It's like the slow boiling frog, but then it sometimes gets a little too hot in the pan, and they lower the temperature, and then they get comfortable again, so then they start increasing the temperature again, until again they get uncomfortable. But every time we do that, we destroy capitalism a little bit more, we destroy freedom a little bit more, And it's harder. We dig ourselves deeper and deeper into holes that it's going to be harder and harder to get out of. All right. Thoughts on the benefit corporation classification, pure virtue signaling? No. I think there are people who buy into this. So benefits corporation is a corporation set up at its inception not to maximize shareholder wealth. I mean, I think that's the honest thing to do if you're going to do that. I think there are certain idealists, wrong idealists, who believe that this is the right way to run a business, who believe that, I don't think these businesses will thrive. I don't think they'll be successful. I think maybe you'll have one or two, but they're not going to be a phenomena that is successful because I don't think they can function well. Now, again, you might find an exception here or there where they somehow manage to make it function. But no, the whole point of virtue signaling means I don't really believe this, but I want other people to think I believe it. No, people actually believe this crap. Not everything people say that is altruistic, collectivistic, socialistic is virtue signaling. Many of them just believe it. They're idealistic. They really buy into it. They're not trying to convince anybody. They actually buy it. So, yeah, I think that is the case. All right. All right, let's slow down on the Super Chat questions. I'll get to all the ones asked so far, but we're already an hour in, and I've got a bunch of these questions. All right. Are most college professors losers who couldn't make it in the private sector? I don't think most. I don't think that's true. I mean, they're losers in many respects. That doesn't mean they wouldn't make it in the private sector, partially because the private sector would force them not to be losers. I mean, one of the beauties of the private sector is that it forces you in some sense, right? It forces you in some sense to be reality oriented. Otherwise, you suffer immediate consequences, something that academia doesn't do. So a lot of college professors would have to adapt, and I think many of them would adapt. Now, remember, a lot of college professors are science, engineering, business. Now, some of them couldn't make it. Some of them would be complete losers, but not all of them. And the English teachers, the history, the philosophy, some of those are very smart, and they would adapt. They would adapt, and they would stop being, and they would learn how stupid they were as college professors if they actually had to go and work for a living. Not all of them. Some of them would be absolute unmitigated losers and would be homeless. All right, this is, I guess, just a comment, not a question. I had nothing but stupid hippies for teachers. I believe you. Is the left fomenting a civil war that they will ultimately lose? No, I mean, I think if anybody's fomenting a civil war, I think it's the right, because I think the right thinks that they will win. I don't think the left has illusions about winning a civil war. I don't think the left wants a civil war. Who's going to fight on the sides left? So I don't think they're doing it on purpose. Now, are they fomenting a civil war in terms of taking the country in such a wacky direction that the civil war might actually happen? I don't see a civil war happening, at least not anytime soon. I just don't see it. I don't see people going out with weapons out into the streets and fighting each other. I don't think there are enough people in America actually believe in anything to want to risk their life to fight for it. That's a pretty wild statement. I don't think the left, I don't think you're going to see people out in the streets with M16s fighting for trans rights. I mean, there might be one or two, but civil wars, like hundreds of thousands. I think you're right in the sense that the right would win it. I think you're right that the right would fight. The right would rally. I think it's much more likely that the right fights against, let's say, transsexual rights than the left fights for transsexual rights. I think the left capitulates, the left falls, the left are wimps. But I don't think that's a good thing, because the kind of right that would emerge from the left capitulating in that sense is just as bad, if not worse, than the worst of the left. So what's happening with the tribalism in America is we're getting the worst of all worlds. We're getting the worst of the left and the worst of the right. And the difference between the worst of the left and the worst of the right is, as you note, the worst of the right will win, and the worst of the right is sustainable, whereas the worst of the left is fleeting. This is Leonard Peikoff's, hypothesis in his dim hypothesis. The worst of the left are nihilists who have nothing to integrate around. The worst of the right are nationalist, racist, religionists who integrate around those three things. And that's much more powerful, much more destructive, much more dangerous, much more lasting than anything the left could do. Now, hopefully neither one comes to fruition, but there's a sense in which the left is poking the right, and at some point they could evoke a massive violent response from the right. We're already seeing violence from the right, but you could see, real massive violence from the right where and this is, again, my fear of, my dislike of the Trump presidency. I think it encourages this, kind of an authoritarian response from the right. And right and left here, I assume everybody's a collectivist. The current political spectrum is, far left collectivists, far right collectivists, moderate collectivists, and that's the spectrum. And individualism is somewhere else. It's not on the left-right spectrum anymore. So we are not on that spectrum. So when I say right, I mean collectivists. Thoughts on Rand Paul calling for media to expose the whistleblower? I think it's disgusting. Really disgusting. This is the guy who claimed to defend Snowden. And Snowden's right to be a whistleblower and to be protected from prosecution and persecution as a whistleblower. This is the guy who believes in the rule of law. We have whistleblower laws that clearly protect the identity of the whistleblower. It really is. Rand Paul sold his soul wholeheartedly to Donald Trump. He has made a mockery of everything he once believed in. He is a senator who has said almost nothing about a government spending going out of control. He licks Donald Trump's boots regularly. So I have lost whatever respect I had for Rand Paul. I've lost completely. He's an apologist for Trump, but just lost his credibility as a deficit hawk. When he first came to Senate, he proposed a whole budget that cut $500 billion from next year's budget. That he balanced the budget in 3 years. Now, where is that guy? Now, he was always soft-spoken and kind of quiet and a little mealy-mouthed and stuff. But this is, Republicans have sold their souls. Look at Ted Cruz. Look at, all of them. Where are the principled Republicans? I once thought there were like 5 or 6 of them in the Senate. They're gone. Should federal student loans be forgiven, given how predatory it is to give an 18-year-old hundreds of thousands of dollars for a useless degree? I don't think you can forgive them. But certainly, I think that there is a way to reduce the burden, to speed up repayment, to cut payments significantly. as part of a comprehensive plan to get the government out of the business of funding education. So as long as the government is funding education, you can't do anything. You have to get the government out of the business of funding education. And as part of the government getting out of the business completely, zero, no grants, no scholarships, no loans, zero. Today they do basically 100%. And then shifting all that to the private sector as part of a comprehensive plan like that, you can also part of a plan like that, you can also reduce the debt burden that people have. Okay, there's a question on the whistleblower. Fair enough about Rand Paul. But one's entitled to face one's accuser. No. I mean, this is not a court of law. And there are clear laws about whistleblowers, right? There's clear legal precedent. This isn't, you might not like the laws. You might say the laws are wrong. But you can't tell people, go ahead and violate the laws. We don't care about the laws today. So if the whistleblower was on Obama, let's just run the exercise. If there was a whistleblower claiming Obama did X, Y, Z, and then there were hearings, and Republicans were running hearings, and Democrats came out and said, oh no, we need to reveal the name of the whistleblower. I mean, Republicans would flip out. Rand Paul. Everybody would flip out. There's zero entitlement to face one's accuser in the kind of proceeding that is happening right now. You can interrogate the accuser, or if the accuser won't face cross-examination, then you discount their testimony. In a sense, you ignore their testimony. You can't ignore their testimony. The fact is that nothing that Trump is being accused of right now depends on the whistleblower. Because the whistleblower only had second-hand information about the phone call and about all the stuff going on with Ukraine. Now there's testimony that's directly from people who were on the call and who were instructed to do X, Y, and Z. So you've got direct evidence. So you don't even need the whistleblower. This is all a distraction. But no, I mean, imagine if there was a whistleblower who was a union member and he wanted to reveal information about how the union was actually run by the mafia. But he was afraid, because if he was revealed, not only would he be fired, he would be kicked out of the union. His life would be in danger because of the mafia characteristics of the union. And he wanted to remain anonymous. Would a grand jury take his testimony anonymously? Sure they would. They would take into account that it's anonymous. They would discount it to some extent. And then you go and you find other evidence. But you don't, would Rand Paul have asked that Snowden reveal his name if he could have stayed anonymous? Of course not. He would have fought to keep Snowden's name hidden, because the things Snowden were revealing were things that Rand Paul viewed as bad. The only reason they want this, the whistleblower's name is because the things he's revealing they consider bad. So there's no rule of law. It's all a question of whether it's good for me or bad for me. That's pure pragmatism. That's Donald Trump's way of governing. That's a destruction of the American system. And you're seeing it throughout government now. In Congress, in the White House, in agencies, in the State Department, throughout this. Whatever works, whatever gets me what I need tomorrow, whatever keeps the left out of the White House, you see that all over the place. As long as we're beating the left, nothing else matters, including if we have to violate the law, including if we have to break into the Democratic Party headquarters. Nixon wouldn't be impeached today. The Republicans would just say, so what? We had to defeat the left. What's the big deal? The left is really, really evil. They're really, really bad. So we broke in. No, nobody got hurt. We didn't kill anybody. What's the big deal? That's how far we've come. Nobody would care today. All right. Is objectivist one of the only optimistic philosophers ever produced? Yes. And objectivism is optimistic at its core, in the sense that it's positive about human potential. It's not optimistic in another sense, because it's realistic, but it has a positive view of the world, a positive view of man's role in the world, man's place in the world, and man's ability to achieve his own happiness in the world. Objectivism is one of the few philosophies in history that says man is capable and worthy, emphasis on worthy, of being happy in this world, and capable of doing it. And here's the way to do it. Use your mind. Human beings have the tool to achieve happiness, to achieve success. You know, notice the exact opposite of like a Jordan Peterson, who rejects the idea that we have a tool to achieve happiness. Happiness just happens. Who rejects that we're worthy of happiness. That happiness is something something that comes as an act is the wrong verb, but as a consequence. It's a form of justice. It's not justice because nobody's giving it to you. It's not like God is making you happy. But life is making you happy because you've lived a good life, because you followed the right principles, because you're attuned, you're in harmony with the world, with reality, with nature. That sounds new agey, right? Ooh, we have to have a consciousness in harmony with nature. But it's true. That's what objectivism advocates for, if you understand what harmony means. What is your favorite classical composer and why? Now that is a difficult one. I don't know that I have one. I love so much classical music, and different classical music with different moods. I mean, certainly Beethoven is one of my top. Rachmaninoff, some of his pieces, not everything. Brahms, almost everything. Schubert, sometimes. Tchaikovsky, sometimes. Some of his stuff. Verdi and Puccini on the upper side. Yeah, I mean, that would be my top. I like Bruckner, but he's not one of my favorites. He's too didactic. I mean, it's hard to talk about music. It's hard to put the right terminology on music, but I don't know. He's not free-flowing enough. It's not free-form enough. I love Beethoven, even though Ayn Rand didn't like him. I like, because of the intensity and the struggle and the drama and the victory. I like Liszt. As I said, I like Bruckner. He's just not my favorite. I love Brahms. I just went to a concert on Saturday night, which had Brahms' violin concerto with a really a young violinist. She was gorgeous, and she played really nicely. I mean, not the kind of powerful performance that you would get from a Yasha Heifetz or something like that, but a nice, a really nice performance. I really liked it, and Brahms is great. Karl Orff, no. I mean, I like Carmina Burana, but it's not. No, it doesn't compare to Verdi's Requiem or Mozart's Requiem. Haydn, I'm not crazy about Haydn. I mean, I get bored. Just not intense enough, not dramatic enough. Mozart I like, but it's like, I'm not crazy about. Elgar, I like, but I'm not crazy. I like certain pieces of Elgar, but again, not in my top. I mean, Grieg's Piano Concerto, Schumann's Piano Concerto, Franck's Cello or Violin Sonata, Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto. I mean, for each one of them, I have a specific piece that is at the top. Mozart's not my favorite, no. I mean, he's probably my second tier after the top five that I gave you. My top five would be Beethoven, Schubert, Brahms, Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, and then, certain pieces by Grieg, Mendelssohn, Schumann, Mozart, and then, of course, Verdi and Puccini. Yeah. So, I don't think Mozart was a mathematician. I think Bach was a mathematician. That Bach's music strikes me as the most mathematical, cold, very cold. I like war music. But the beauty of the other piece that was played was Schumann's Fourth Symphony, which is also terrific. Really, really, really good. It was so much fun. So I love going to classical music concerts. I mean, so much fun. All right. Let's see. Have you watched the Snowden interview with Joe Rogan? I've watched parts of it. I really find them interesting. I find Snowden very articulate, very interesting thinker, very interesting things he has to say. But I haven't listened to the whole interview. I'd like to listen to the whole interview and comment more extensively when I have time. I will do that. Let's see. I mean, I like some Shostakovich, but very little. Is no accident. He composed under the Soviets. I like certain things by Bach, but it strikes me as cold. We could go over lots of stuff. I mean, I do a lot of classical music. Somebody's asking, do you have any jazz favorites? Did Rand? I thought I read somewhere she did. Rand didn't like jazz. She didn't like jazz. Leonard Peikoff likes jazz quite a bit. I'm sure he has jazz favorites. I don't know what they are. I like jazz, but I don't have favorites. So I don't know enough about jazz. I haven't listened to enough jazz. When I hear it, I like it, but I haven't invested in it. In classical music, I invested, and it strikes me it's a very, very, very worthwhile investment. Right? If you want to ask questions, you have to ask questions through the super chat. I can't take questions off of the chat, off of the regular chat. Okay, so that we did Snowden. Have you ever decided to reduce significantly the time you spend with a loved one because the politics of their husband or wife are so abhorrent that it makes it miserable to be in their company? No, I haven't. I mean, I don't know what you mean by a loved one. I assume you mean family, like a sister, brother, something like that, cousin. No, because usually it's my family that has the abhorrent politics. And, and I just don't talk politics with them. It's pretty simple. We just avoid politics. And, but I can completely understand cutting ties with family or cutting ties with others if you can't get along or if you can't talk politics. But I don't think politics are that important in life, in living. I mean, they're important out there, but you have no influence on them. So the idea that everybody you encounter, you have to argue and debate and discuss politics with. Now, I have some relatives who won't stop talking about politics, so I avoid them. I just avoid them. I won't see them because they're just obnoxious and it upsets me. But I can completely understand cutting off people because they won't stop talking about it. But I think the easiest way is to tell them, look, I'm here to have a good time. Let's not talk about politics. I think that works for some of my relationships. What are your, let me just do this. What about the Joker review? I still have to see the movie. I haven't had a chance to see it. It might have to wait until it comes out on a streaming platform on iTunes or something because I just have not had a chance to go to theater. And now I want to go see Terminator, the Terminator movie. I love the first two Terminator movies. I would love to, one of these days we'll do a show just on Terminator 1, 2. And they say this one is pretty good. So I want to see this one, even though it's a flop at the box office. From what I've read, it is pretty good and has the spirit of the first two Terminator movies. So one of these days we'll do a show just on Terminator. I will get to the Joker. I just haven't had the time to go see the movie. I'd have to not do one of these shows and go to theater instead. Yeah, Terminator 2 is brilliant. I really like that movie a lot. Was it a mistake for Nixon to open up trade with China? It seemed unprincipled and pragmatic to trade with the communist countries. Well, no, I don't think it was a mistake. And Ayn Rand didn't think it was a mistake. Ayn Rand supported the decision to open up to China. Ayn Rand did not believe that it was the role of government to dictate who we trade with and who we don't trade with. She didn't believe it was the role of government. She believed the only times you don't trade with a country, that is, where the government dictates who you trade with and who you don't trade with, is when that country is an enemy, a real threat. China under Mao Zedong was not a threat to the United States. It was too poor, too weak. And therefore, it was not a problem, I think, according to Rand, to trade with China. She has a whole essay about the whole Nixon going to China thing. She thinks it was a massive mistake for Nixon to go to China, but she did not think it was a massive mistake to open up relations with China. Partially, she believed it was a good strategic move against what she believed the real enemy was, which was the Soviet Union. Again, not just because they were communists, but because they were actual threat to the United States. They were communist and aggressive about their communism. So, yeah, I don't think it was a mistake. I think we should trade with Cuba. Not that you should trade with Cuba. That the U.S. government should stop banning trade with Cuba. I think we should only ban trade with countries that are a physical threat to the lives and property of Americans. There are only, I think, 2 countries in the world that qualify. 2.5. Iran, North Korea, and half is Saudi Arabia. Which I think we could fix Saudi Arabia pretty quickly without a war. But those are the 2.5 countries. So government should just leave us alone to trade with who you want. Now, I would not trade with Cuba because Cuba's a police state. Cuba's a totalitarian state. And as China becomes worse now and worse, I would hesitate to trade with China, and as an individual, not as a country. And in the early days, in the 70s and early 80s, I would not buy Chinese goods. But for a long time, I had no problem buying Chinese goods because I thought China was moving away from totalitarianism, and it was. It's just moving back in that direction over the last 3-4 years. All right, we'll end with this question. What are your favorite strategies for spreading objectivism? Who do you strategize with about this? So the who are people I respect who I think understand what it takes to change a culture. And the people like Ankar Ghate, the several members of the board of directors of the Ayn Rand Institute, Tal Tzfani, who is now the CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute. It's people at the Institute who, I'd say Ankar more than anybody, and then some of the board members, who have thought about this, but who have experience, but who are really you need to think about this a lot. And you need to know history. You need to know how other intellectual movements have changed the world, what kind of impact they have, right? And I think there are basically 2 main thrusts to changing the world, to spreading objectivism, if you would. One is get people to read Ayn Rand's books, whatever it takes. Give free books to high school teachers to teach. Do essay contests to get people to write essays and read the book in the process. Advocate for reading the books on talk shows, on television, blogs, podcasts, YouTube channels, whatever. Get people to read Ayn Rand's books. That's strategy number 1. Maybe the most important, because that is what objectivism is. It's Ayn Rand stuff. She was the best communicator of her ideas. Second, replace the intellectuals. Replace the intellectuals. That is, train new intellectuals. Train people who can speak and write and argue and debate and apply these ideas, both at the very philosophical level and at the application level. So, what we need today is 1,000 Alex Epsteins, 1,000 Yaron Brooks, and 1,000 Ankar Ghates. Not 1,000 of each of us, Just 1,000 of people like that. Anyway, from the Greg Salamieri and Anka Gates who are doing philosophy, to the Alex Epsteins who's doing particular policy, but from a philosophical perspective. The whole spectrum of intellectuals through that. If you had 1,000 today, I believe it would be game over. Right? And I include in that psychologists who are intellectuals, particularly psychologists not just to practice, but teach and argue and debate about psychology. Scientists, and pure scientists who are using objectivist epistemology in the way they do the science and attribute their success. Imagine somebody getting the Nobel Prize in physics, and in his speech to when he's receiving it, attributes his success to the objectivist epistemology. You need philosophers of science. Then you need educators. All kinds of educators. So you need people in the intellectual fields doing what people in intellectual fields do from an objectivist perspective. And when you have 1,000 people like that doing it, and you're selling Ayn Rand's books left and right, you win. And in a sense, the way to get the book sold is to have the intellectuals, because the intellectuals, one of the things they do is they recommend the books. But it all goes together. So you got the top of the funnel, which is getting a lot of people exposed by reading Ayn Rand's books. And then some of them become intellectuals who then go and expose more people and get them to read Ayn Rand's books, who then create more intellectuals, and it's a virtuous circle like that. And that's my job. I mean, my job is to get you to read Ayn Rand. And for those of you who've already read Ayn Rand, to get you to be more motivated about spreading the ideas further. And for some of you, hopefully to get you motivated to become an intellectual so that one day you can replace me. And Greg Salamieri, and Don Watkins, and Gina Golan, and everybody else. Right? So today we have kind of a network, I'd say about 200 objectivist or very, very people very, very friendly to objectivist, like intellectuals. There are probably another 100 to 200 people who we don't include in that list who are very friendly or might even consider themselves objectivist who we just don't deal with. So that's 400. I'd say you need 1,000 is probably not enough because some of those people are pretty quiet about their objectivism. Of those, I'd say about 20 to 30 crusaders. Crusaders for objectivism. When we get to 1,000 crusaders, we win. 1,000 crusaders. So 1,000 people willing to go out there and say, Donald Trump sucks. And I don't care if I lose half of my subscribers. The truth is that Donald Trump sucks. That is the best understanding of objectivism. In politics, that's what it is. And climate change sucks, right? So, being willing to stand up and say, bomb Iran into oblivion, and, we need laissez-faire capitalism, complete separation of state from economics, and by the way, you should all be selfish. And here's what selfishness means. We need 1,000 people who regularly say stuff like that in their own fields, in their own realms. And that includes professors and teachers in schools, but who are willing to stand by their ideas. The Marxists are not embarrassed about their Marxism. Objectivists need to be objectivists and need to fully attribute to Ayn Rand the ideas that Ayn Rand's. And when we have that, as I said, that's when we win. So those are my strategies for spreading objectivism. Really, those are my strategies for world domination, because that is my goal in the end. It's to dominate the world. And I can see the conspiracy theories already. Another Jew wants to dominate the world. That's how they'll talk about it. All right. And by the way, we will win. There is no question in my mind that objectivism will dominate the world. It probably won't be in my lifetime, but I am happy, satisfied, content with the fact that I am playing a role in that ultimate victory. That when we look backwards from the day of victory, I will have played a minor role in that. Because we will win. Ayn Rand, Leonard Peikoff will be the main heroes of that victory. I hope somebody remembers some of the work all of us did as well. But, the main thing is victory. And, I'm really, really happy that I'm playing that role. And to the extent that some of you have come to Ayn Rand because of me and because of the books I've written, the podcast I've done, the iTunes channel and everything else, that is all increasing the probability of chance that we will win in the end. All right. On that note, keep on fighting. Keep on sharing the content. Let's spread objectivism. Get more and more people exposed to it. Why don't you go now and buy a couple of Ayn Rand books on Amazon and give them to some friends or family? Maybe that obnoxious person who is married to a family member who you can't stand. Give them a copy of Atlas Shrugged to the Fountainhead. All right, everybody. I will see you. It'll be a few days. I am traveling. I will be in Michigan on Thursday, for those of you in Michigan. So I will be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So next show will probably be Saturday evening and certainly Sunday afternoon. And then I'll be gone for a long time, so because I'm traveling to Europe, I'll probably do some shows from Europe. But that's why I tried to do as many shows as I could the last few days, because I knew that I've got a big trip in front of me that I won't be able to. And those of you in London and in other places in Europe that I'll be visiting in next week and the week after that, I look forward to seeing you all there. Hey, have a great rest of your week. See some of you in Michigan in a couple of days. Jennifer, I'll see you there. I know that. And have a great evening, guys. Bye.